Welcome into week 5 or week 8 of the NFL season. It feels like it might be week 5 because we're in Groundhog's Day, but we're really in week 8 already. It is the bye apocalypse. The bye weeks are loaded up. We've got 6 teams on bye. We have normal game times for the first time in a while. We don't have an early morning game on Sunday, and we don't have a doubleheader on Monday. So the slate kind of seems about the same relative to having those other games, but we're going to dive through. We're going to look at DraftKings primarily, your cash games, your GPP lineups on the DFS show here. It's myself, Jeff Bell, with John Lee, with Phil Alexander. We are missing our fearless leader, Devin Knotts, this week. We'll do our very, very best to hold it down, but let's dive in here and let's look at our games of the week. And Phil, why don't you start us off? Maybe look at some of these games that you're targeting this week here in week 8.
You know what, Jeff? With John Lee on the show, I could not possibly take the stage.
The Vegas value chart. We have to go to John.
From our Vegas value chart guy. I'm gonna kick it to John, and I'll clean up anything that he doesn't put there.
Yeah, the Vegas value chart. Hopefully, everybody's aware of it. If you're not, shameless plug. It goes up every Tuesday. It's kind of your first look at the week for you subscribers, just to kind of give an idea of who we might be looking at, and certainly that's how we have started this show for a long time, at least while I was participating. There's some big games this week. It's, when you make the Vegas value chart every week, you kind of notice trends. And one of the trends that I had been seeing for the first month or two of the season was that, we've been seeing a lot of lower scoring totals. And this is the first week that I think there are some pretty high totals across the board. The highest, no surprise, Dallas again, heading over to Mile High City, taking on Denver, who pulled out a heart stopper last week against the Giants. That game should be pretty interesting because the Cowboys, they're my Cowboys too. Big fan of, don't tell anybody, but am a long time Cowboys fan, and they looked good last week. Very, very good. So, going up against an otherwise solid defense in Denver, Vegas is projecting this one as a shootout. So a lot of folks will be on that. We'll certainly talk about it as we go through. I think a game that's interesting because there's a lot of cheap salaries, but still a high score is Chicago and Baltimore. We don't really know what's going to happen quite yet with Lamar Jackson. I'm sure we'll touch on that. As of now, he's looking like maybe he'll play, looking like he won't. I think he is truly questionable as of Thursday night. And then on the other side, you've got Caleb Williams kind of looking like an upstart number 1 pick. And then after that, I think this is the more important thing. Those are pretty obvious. After that, you've got two games at 46.5 and another game at 47.5. And, these are the games that I think win and lose tournaments for folks because they're not quite as obvious. And quite frankly, they're only 2 or 3 points under. And when you split those across teams, we're talking 1 or 2 points on team totals. So, that's where the diamonds in the rough are. That's where tournaments are won. And hopefully over the next, call it 50 minutes or so, we can help folks pinpoint where some of those diamonds are.
Yeah, Phil, is there anything that you're picking up that we haven't touched on yet?
Not much in terms of the game specifically, but one thing that struck me about this slate is that DraftKings has been trending towards tighter pricing now for, I want to say, the last 2 weeks or so. This week, it is really challenging as of Thursday night to build a lineup where you feel good about every roster slot. So seems like it will be a good week for tournaments. As always, some value will probably open up on Friday once we get the full practice reports. But yeah, for now it's challenging. And the other thing that was kind of unique, John mentioned we have all these games with high totals, but 7 out of the 10 games on the slate have point spreads of at least 6.5 points. So they're high total games, but they're also projected to be lopsided games. So that is going to challenge us to think about how we're going to navigate blowout risk a little bit and how we're going to be especially careful to build lineups, whether we're playing the favorites or we're playing the underdogs. We're going to be telling stories with our lineups, and we're going to be making sure that that story is cohesive, that it makes sense, especially where those lineups could capitalize on some potential chaos in these games.
Yeah, I'm glad you went there because one of the things that I've been noticing, and you look last week, it was pretty obvious, like with the Chiefs game, where basically at halftime they just kind of stopped because they didn't have to go anymore. And then you look 2 weeks prior, we had that Broncos ugly game against the Jets in London, where frankly it looked like the Broncos didn't really feel like putting too much of a game plan together because they didn't feel particularly threatened by the Jets. I mean, we have the Jets here. They're going up against the Bengals, and we know we saw an explosion last week with the Steelers with the Bengals. We have the Colts, a high-end offense, going up against the Titans. Some of these games, are you the Dolphins Falcons? I mean, that looks a fantastic matchup for the Falcons side. Are you concerned at all about just the blowouts? And if your guy doesn't get it early, they are just not as worthwhile as you would think it might be?
I think you have to be concerned, but you also have to take a stand on slates like this. How do you think the game is going to go? Because a lot of people tend to treat the Vegas lines as gospel. And we know that every week there's going to be games that don't go according to Vegas's script. And that's where tournaments are won. So whether you do think that those games are going to be blowouts, let's say maybe instead of a 400-yard game for the quarterback on the heavy favorite, you plan for a more efficient 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, and kind of map that out in your head and think about how those games are going to go. And from a GPP perspective, that also gives you the ability to play the flip side, the underdog. There's often a lot of value in playing the underdogs and then a bring back on the favorite. So you look at where the points are going to be concentrated on the favorite to get them ahead, and then you play the opposing passing game. That's one of my favorite things to do on slates with games like these too.
Yeah, we're gonna before we move into our cash games, just please take a moment to like, subscribe, do all those fun things. But let's look at our cash game here, our cash game lineup, at cash game quarterback. And I'm curious, for me, Bo Nix stands out, but I'd love to toss it to you, John, and see what direction are you looking at in your cash game quarterback.
Yeah, you got it. I mean, I think I think it's Bo Nix against the Cowboys. Teams have obviously done quite well against the Cowboys defense, and the nice thing is, even if they don't, the Cowboys are going to score 25, 30 points every game. And so they're going to push that quarterback who might be underperforming into putting up even junk points. So Nick's only $6,000. He's affordable on a tight week, as Phil's already pointed out. There are, as I look at the top value plays, 3 of the top 4 are less than $5,000, but none of them really inspire confidence for cash games. Spencer Rattler's at the top of my list in terms of points per dollar. I don't know that I can get behind him. And then it's Bo Nix, who is probably my choice. And after that, it goes to Michael Penix and Tyrod Taylor, or Tyrod. We were just talking about this beforehand. Tyrod Taylor. So for me, it's Knicks, and if you want a secondary option, you need to save a few bucks. I don't mind, even though he's in terms of points per dollar projection, I don't mind Joe Flacco this week at 5,400. He saves you 10%, and if you need that extra $600, I think the quality of his receivers we've seen elevates his game. And obviously, he's got a great game against a great matchup against Phil's Jets.
Phil, is it going to be Taylor? Or I know he's got an injury that he was dealing with. Have they been definitive on what direction they're going?
No, not as of Thursday night. They haven't. I mean, it certainly seems like the comments from Woody Johnson, the Jets owner, would indicate that he is quite done with the Justin Fields experiment. I think it would be Tyrod Taylor without question, if he wasn't dealing with this knee injury. And I know that he did have arthroscopic surgery on that knee right before the season started. So it could be a re-aggravation of an old injury. It might give Fields another start. I'm with John and you. Knicks is my play, Jeff. For all the reasons that John mentioned, I do have a note here that says I refuse to do Joe Flacco to my cash game lineup. And you know, I wouldn't blame anyone because you do need the extra $600 or so that Flacco gets you, and they are doing a good thing there. He's on my list for tournaments, but I just couldn't stomach it in cash. You know what it boils down to is like this Bengals team is nearly a touchdown favorite, and when I just kind of zoom out, I'm like, how are they almost a touchdown favorite against any team in the NFL? Like something seems ready to go wrong there. So I don't know. I don't think Flacco has the safety. I think Nick should be fine. And I think the only other things that you could do are to spend up to one of the expensive guys. But what is the rest of your lineup going to look like at that stage of the game? So, Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts stood out, but you can't really get anywhere once you plug those guys in. So I think you have to go with Knicks.
If Michael Penix were to scratch in a juicy lineup or in a juicy matchup against Miami, you've got Kirk Cousins sitting there at 4,400. Does he enter the thought process conversation for you guys?
For sure.
Okay, good deal. Let's look at running backs, and I've got a running back take, but I might save it for the GPPs. But I'm curious where you're going to go. I know we got Bucky Irving out already. We've got touching that Denver game potentially again. What direction are you going to go here, Phil, on your running backs and cash game lineups?
Pretty sure the first name that every single person who builds a roster this week is going to click is Bijan Robinson because of that Miami matchup and because he's Bijan Robinson. I will say John was correct last week to question Quinshad Junkins in this matchup. I know it was more weather related, and I did end up playing him anyway, and I enjoyed the 3 touchdowns. But the more I thought about it, that was pretty thin chalk when we're talking about like the Browns game script dependent running back, putting all of our eggs in that basket. And he did only average 3.4 yards per carry. So I think we got away with one there last week with Judkins, but Bijan Robinson is not Judkins, and I have zero doubts that he is going to trounce Miami at home. Interestingly, and this is really a situation where Atlanta just plays a lot better at home, but Robinson in 3 home starts, 27.4, 31.1, and 38.8 DraftKings points. And he's got this matchup against the Dolphins that really hasn't failed. So he's my favorite of the higher end running backs, although I will say that you could certainly consider Jonathan Taylor or Christian McCaffrey. They both look like fine plays, especially Taylor. It's just that the pricing is tight, like we said. So as much as I would like to jam in 2 expensive running backs, I think that the roster construction this week calls for a back in the 6K range at running back 2. And I think we've got 3 guys that we could consider. I mentioned Breece Hall in this spot last week, and that did not work out well for me because the Jets just can't float a single fantasy option. So I don't know. Devin said last week that he was too volatile for cash, and maybe that is the case even in this Bengals matchup, which by schedule adjusted fantasy points per game is actually better for running backs than Miami. Derrick Henry is 6K. I don't love playing him on DraftKings because of the pass catching concerns, but usually those concerns are unfounded because Henry just stampedes other running backs, other defensive lines. He's got Lamar Jackson back, so the offense should be back. But I don't know that I'm getting there either. Rashad White is my favorite at 6,400. Reliable offense. Tampa Bay has a 25.5 point implied total. Playing the Saints, whose run defense just got blown up by DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monungai. And he's a true workhorse. 83% snap share since Irving went down. That trails only Jonathan Taylor and Christian McCaffrey over the last 3 weeks. He's active in the passing game. He's in at the goal line. So I think for 6,400, White is in a really good spot. So it's Robinson and White for me at running back.
John, do you have anybody else that you're looking at playing in your cash lineups? Or are you thinking the same plays? Because those 2 do feel like really solid plays.
Yeah, he's got the same 3 guys as me. I think the only, I mean, I'm not going to argue too loudly, but I think I would go with Baltimore with Derrick Henry over Rashad White. But I I think it's neither here nor there in terms of you're really kind of cutting thin if you're going to argue which guy's the better guy there. I just Derrick Henry at $6,000. It's been a long time since Derrick Henry has been that cheap, and
Yeah.
I just think about what's going on there. I guess the question is, I mean, is Lamar Jackson guaranteed to play this weekend? I mean, is it 75-25? Is he probable? Is he questionable? What do you guys think?
I think it's probable from what I've seen. I've seen some. I don't know. I think the naysayers I've seen have been some random injury doctors on Twitter that have decided that they don't think that Lamar should play. But I think it's probable. And the Ravens are sitting. That nobody's really pulling away in that division, but Ravens are kind of sitting in a place where they really can't afford to let many more games go.
Yeah, that's my take as well. And I mean, I think Vegas thinks they're playing too because I checked the line before we went live, and they're still 7.5 point favorites. And if Lamar wasn't quarterback, I guess they wouldn't be that high. Lamar both takes and gives upside to Derrick Henry in the sense that he just opens up that offense. And um, I just love the game script there. It's 7.5 point favorites. He's the guy that I probably would slot in aside or B side Bijan. But again, Rashad is also on my list. So whoever of those three you like and whoever fits best with your build, go with it.
All right, let's look at wide receivers. And John, I'm going to go to you first here on your wide receivers. And are we feeling Dallas here? What direction you think you're going to go to target wide receivers? I know Chris Olave was a very popular play last week, came through and hit big with 2 touchdowns. What are you looking at in your wide receiver board?
Yeah. I mean, on the high end, I don't know that you can get there, especially if you're going with Bijan. But on the high end, if maybe you, I'm not suggesting that you do, but if you did skip Bijan and you wanted to go on the high end at wide receiver, if you went Rashad White and Derrick Henry to go high end wide receiver, I think Jamar Chase is a great play at 8,100 this week. It's not very often you get a guy who is that expensive at the wide receiver position and still is near the top of the list at points per dollar. I don't know if that's the direction I'm going, but I guess I start in the high end to go lower. And then you've got a series of guys who in that middle section that come out pretty high. Olave's there again. Um, the Saints across the board, I think, are too cheap this week, which is kind of weird. But just looking kind of in my pre-read for the show, the Saints keep coming up, and maybe that's a sign of a discussion to have in terms of tournament tactics, if you will. Rashid Shaheed is another guy that comes up pretty high on my list. He's more of a GPP play for me, for what it's worth, but looking at the top of the value chart there, he's a guy that comes out high. The one that I like, I'm almost afraid to say it, but I think I'm going to end up going this way in cash, is Jerry Jeudy at 4,100. He continues to struggle, but all the metrics are there. Everything I look at, he's ranked super high. He's top of my value chart this week, almost hitting 3 points per dollar. He's got a great game script matchup in the sense that they should be throwing the ball quite a bit. The only thing that gives me pause is obviously his quarterback situation. Dylan Gabriel's ADOT's about 2.2, and Jeudy is more of a deeper routes guy. That said, you're going to have to make some difficult decisions, and I think slotting in a $4,000 receiver and a very cheap tight end can get you there this week. And so those are the guys I'm looking at. I mean, I think Agbuka is great value, especially with Mike Evans going down last week. It's just, again, you're going to have to make some difficult decisions in cash games because as of Thursday night, there's not a slew of value outside the tight end position.
What do you have, Phil?
Yeah, one thing that I'll say about Judy too is that the Patriots specifically struggle against outside receivers. So he's got the usage metrics and he's got specifically the cornerback matchup in his favor this week. So he is a good play. I don't know that I could bring myself to do it because of what we've seen from that Browns passing game, but I would just kind of lend it some credence. It's not crazy to think about. I think you can fit Chase. It gets a little ugly because if you're pairing him with Bijan Robinson at this stage of the game, you're probably looking at a two tight end build, which I know that not everybody's a fan of, but I do think it's in play this week for cash. I just don't see why the Bengals aren't going to go with the same strategy that worked against Pittsburgh. I mean, they weren't able to stop it, so make the Jets prove that they could stop it. And it looks like the Jets are going to have to stop it without Sauce Gardner, who is their only player in the secondary worth speaking of, maybe the only player on the team worth speaking of. He's been out of practice with a concussion all week, and he was definitely going to be on James in one-on-one coverage. So Chase was like the engine of the offense. I mean, he was almost like I don't want to say a running back because they were a little bit downfield, but there were these fast layup targets and just asking him to do what it is that he does once he gets the ball in his hands. Um, Insane role that we've almost never seen. So if you think that the Bengals are going to move the ball on the Jets, and there's no reason to think that they can't, I think Chase is kind of like a one of a kind play. I think you have to try to get him in. Um, Zay Flowers, 5,400, I think, is in play. He's kind of still got the Cooper Rush pricing, even though Lamar Jackson is likely to be back this week. Easier to forget, but over the first 2 weeks of the season with Jackson, Flowers, he was hogging targets, 43% of the team's targets over those first 2 weeks. It almost looked like he was poised for like a fat-free version of what Jackson Smith and Jigba has been doing over in Seattle with a mini breakout. But he's clearly mispriced, gets you a piece of that Ravens offense. And if I wasn't planning on playing Henry, I do want to have a piece of that Ravens offense in my cash game lineup. This next one might be a little controversial for cash. I don't know if it's more of a tournament play because he's been up and down. But Drake London at 6,400, I kind of like the price. There's been some scary stats making the rounds on Twitter about his stat lines with Darnell Mooney in the lineup versus not in the lineup. But I think that's just kind of small sample randomness. There's an old school head at Football Guys, for those who remember, Chase Stewart, fellow Jets fan, overall fun guy to hang out with. He had an article way back when that he called Splits Happen. And it just kind of highlighted how completely random splits are. And you could kind of create whatever you want out of them when it comes to crafting a narrative. And I think that's what people are doing with this Darnell Mooney thing. Plus, if you think that Darnell Mooney was the reason Drake London was bad last week, you didn't watch the game. Michael Penix stunk. So he's been a lot better at home along with the entire Falcons offense. And now, even though I might be stepping into the splits happen trap with his home road splits, it does seem to be meaningful. He's been way more comfortable at home. So I think his wide receiver one is in a good spot up against the Dolphins, and that's exactly what London is a wide receiver one. He's had some monster games. Other guys you consider, John mentioned Olave. Good call by him last week, by the way. He finally flashed a ceiling to go along with that floor. And I don't know that it's cash worthy, but Jalen Waddle at 5,700. I think that last week's dud was due mostly to the weather and to obviously playing as poorly as he did. But the volume should be there in 2 games without Hill before last week, 8 targets and 9 targets respectively. Never a bad thing for a player with Waddle's talent profile.
I mean, apparently Tua said that he couldn't see Waddle last week, so that's why Waddle wasn't involved. I do I throw out anything with Kirk Cousins, the broken Kirk Cousins that we saw the second half of last year in terms of those Atlanta splits. I think that we've seen Michael Penix be very comfortable going to Drake London in a way that, and an ability that Kirk Cousins did not have for a good portion of last year. So I think there's a massive grain of salt on some of those splits. I'm looking at, again, this is probably not a cash game play, but at the same time, if you're looking at a way to create some space in your lineup, you've got Troy Franklin at 4,200 in that matchup against Dallas. We've seen Franklin have a couple games here where he's got 10 targets. We've seen a couple other games where Franklin has like no targets. So, I mean, you're definitely playing with fire there a little bit. And then again, I don't know that it's quite there, but at the same time, if you do need to get some value, create some space, Jalen Noel at 3,500. It's a difficult matchup against the 49ers, but you are getting the Monday night pricing a little bit there. And if Nico Collins is out of the lineup, he kind of operates in that short area that CJ Stroud might have to go to, but it is a brutal matchup. The 49ers defense has looked pretty strong for a good portion of the season. I do like the Zay Flowers call up, Phil. I like that pull at 5,400, especially if Lamar Jackson, only if Lamar Jackson's in the lineup. Let's look at tight ends. Right. And you mentioned a couple times tight ends we're going to go to create value. And John, what are you looking at here in tight ends in order to create value? Are you looking at tight ends to create value?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple that are very obvious, and I think there's one that might be worth talking about if you need the extra savings. Dalton Schultz is the guy. You just talked about the receiving situation there in Houston. You're right. They've got a tough matchup against San Francisco, but San Francisco's also lost Fred Warner of late, and he's kind of the guy that held everything together there. I don't know that they'll fall apart without him, but certainly that's a big loss. One of the best defensive players in the entire league, and Schultz is the one receiver this week that has actually been on the field for more than 50% of the time over the past year. So he's 3,300. I think if you want to, I don't know that you will. In fact, I wouldn't advise you to. But the alternative, if you're just a Dalton Schultz hater, is KDOT and 3,400 is $100 more. With Mike Evans going down, he's probably going to see some more action. I'm not a big believer in Sterling Shepard or any of the ancillary receivers there in Tampa Bay outside of the rookie Ekbuka. The one that I want to talk about is Mason Taylor is on the doubtful side of questionable. Is that fair to say? No, you can tell
I'm
me.
I'm not sure. It seemed pretty 50-50 from the last thing that I read. I read that it wasn't considered major, but I don't know how that impacts his availability for this week.
Well, let's not spend a lot of time on it then. But my take on this, if Mason Taylor's playing, he's got a spectacular matchup against the Bengals. And if he's not playing, you've got Jeremy Ruckert at 2,500. I don't mind ever punting at the tight end position. It's such a highly variable position, even for cash games. I think it's a little tougher to do at FanDuel because there's a bit of a premium on the position over there. But on DraftKings, I'm absolutely fine paying the site minimum 2,500. Look at what the Bengals have done against tight ends over the past few weeks. They gave up four touchdowns last week against the Steelers. I think the week prior to that, they gave up a touchdown to the Packers. They gave up 2 the week before to the Lions. They just don't know how to cover the position. And, you're missing Garrett Wilson there in New York. They got to throw to somebody. If he's 2,500 and running against that defense and you need to get your Jamar Chase and your Bijan Robinson, I think it's a good way to get that build.
Yep, I don't hate it. I got the same 2 guys on my list, and like I said, as of now, I'm playing them both in this cash lineup, so that I could get Chase and Bijan in the same one, and still have some decent spend left over at the other wide receiver and running back positions. To me, Otten and Schultz are the Spider-Man meme. I mean, they're like the same thing. They're big, lumbering white guys whose top wide receivers are hurt. But Otten, 13.5 DraftKings points on 9 targets last week when Mike Evans went down. And he's actually been in double digits 3 straight games since the injury started to hit those Tampa receivers. So I think he's every bit just because of the quality of the offense. It wouldn't surprise me if he outscored Dalton Schultz, who is kind of like a catch it and fall down type of player.
I buried the lead here because it's National Tight Ends Day on Sunday, and it's you're talking about
really?
needing tight ends for some savings. It's one of the best days of the year. It is National Tight Ends Day. We are recording during Thursday Night Football. We've already got a first touchdown score for Aronde Gadsden the second. So, the tight ends are already popping off this week as it comes into it. So the tight end position is my favorite position, and it's the best day to celebrate tight ends. I think there's one that's really interesting for potential value due to injury situation, and that's Colson Loveland at 3,000 flat. If Cole Kmet is out, we saw him leave last week's game with injury, did not return. Cole Kmet's out. Loveland can potentially play every single snap for the Bears. We've seen Loveland put some explosive plays on tape in very limited action so far this year, going up against the Ravens in one of those matchups that we talked about at the top of the show as potential shootout back and forth. I think Loveland at 3,000 becomes a pretty interesting play without Cole Kmet in the lineup. That means it's time to do our GPPs, and we get to open up the board when we go through GPPs, and let's open it wide up. Phil, I want you to start out with your GPP quarterback plays. Let's just throw it all over the board. What do you have here?
I might be stealing John's top point per dollar guy because I like Spencer Rattler at 4,700 in tournaments. I mentioned the game theory part of having a lot of these games with heavy favorites and underdogs and figuring out where to take the contrarian stance and then building a cohesive lineup around that thought. And this is one of the games that I definitely have circled because I think that you have a lot of outs in either direction. If Tampa runs up a big score on New Orleans, you have a pass heavy script for Rattler. And then if the Tampa defense just struggles at defending what they normally struggle at defending, which are the pass catchers, John mentioned 2 of them coming up pretty high on his list in Olave and Rashid Shaheed. So you have a pretty cheap double stack there. And that allows you then, you could play one of the Tampa guys on the way back. I prefer Rashad White, like I said. But then you could probably do this is a stack like this is how you get to Bijan Robinson and Jamar Chase, or Bijan Robinson and Jonathan Taylor, or these combinations of high end players that not a lot of entrants are going to have in their tournament lineups. So I really like the Rattler call. This has been like, in all fairness, the 3rd straight week that I felt this way, and the first 2 weeks have not gone very well in terms of my bankroll. So take that for what you will, but I'm heading back out to Spencer Rattler. And then the other guy that I like is Daniel Jones at 6,100. You got Indy implied to score 31 points. They're at home. They're against a defense that's a total punching bag. There's a contingent of the fantasy community that's like still not on board with Jones. They don't believe what their eyes are showing them. He's never really been chalky yet this year. And at this point, we're halfway through the season. The Colts offense is on like a quasi historic pace, and Jones is the overall QB6. I think it's time to adjust those priors and get some exposure to this passing game because I think those who load up against the Titans are probably more likely to do so by spending up to Jonathan Taylor rather than stacking up Jones and Pittman. Or I guess we got to see which receivers are going to be active for them this week.
John, what do you have on your quarterback board here?
Oh, I mean, I'm a bit boring because I have 3 quarterbacks written and 2 of them have been already spoken about. I had Rattler. I don't think that's a surprise based on my lead in with kind of what I was talking about. The Saints being a bit too underpriced this week. The one thing I'll warn folks, if you're going to take kind of that guidance and think about building lineups that are heavy on the Saints, the builds are all going to look very similar. You're going to get heavy on the Jamar Chase because it feels good, and maybe Bijan or Jonathan Taylor, and you're going to have a lot of ownership there on those guys. And so anybody else that is stacking the Saints is going to have similar. So just keep that in mind, and don't be afraid to add in one other kind of flyer or differentiating factor if you build that lineup. As far as the Colts, I had the same logic as Phil. My thinking there was, I can look really quickly, but I think I had Jonathan Taylor. Right now, I've got him as the probably tied for second highest owned running back of the week, and he's got what, 10 touchdowns through 6 or 7 games.
He has 10 touchdowns in his last 5 games.
That's incredible, right? I mean, the level of efficiency there is incredible, and at some point, you have to think that he can't maintain that level of efficiency, even if he scores 1 touchdown. The implied team total was 31 points. That means there's 24 points to go around, and Daniel Jones is 6,100. His receivers are cheap, and it's a leverage play off of the 25% of the field that's going to have Taylor. So, I think Phil said all that, but just hearing it again out of my mouth makes me feel better. The other guy that's on my list. I don't know, I'll put you on the spot here, but who's the best quarterback on the entire slate?
I mean, Josh Allen.
Yes. Josh Allen, to me, is the best quarterback on the slate, and I've got him pegged at 5% ownership. And he's got the 4th highest team total on the slate. I think that he's an excellent choice against the Carolina Panthers. You might say that the Panthers can't keep it close, and maybe that's a fair counterpoint, but it could be very much like what we saw last week with Mahomes, as you led off the show with, Jeff, where they get their 4 touchdowns early, and he retires into the sunset at the beginning of the 4th quarter with 30 fantasy points. And quite frankly, that's very possible. And the one thing I like about this game that I didn't mention when we were talking about the Vegas value chart is these teams. I look at pace stats. These teams have the best collective pace amongst the entire slate. The Buffalo Bills run the 11th fastest offense, and the Carolina Panthers, as you might expect, chasing a lot of games, run the 5th fastest. So we could see quite a few plays here, and I'll take my chances with a guy who's 7,000. I think it also flips the script in terms of creating a unique roster, because you're going expensive at quarterback and force you to do some interesting things at other positions.
Yeah. Is it because that nobody ever knows who to stack him with that the popularity stays low?
For sure. I mean, Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakir, Dalton Kincaid, none of them stand out as being guys you really want to roster, but I mean, it's a classic double stack option. For me, it's probably Kincaid, and I'm a sucker for Keon Coleman. I think he's a guy that probably hasn't lived up to his potential yet, but I still keep waiting to see it.
Yeah, I mean, me being a Bills fan, but there's a lot of it's really an interesting matchup. There's a lot of crossover between Carolina and Buffalo. It's almost like sister organizations, because Brandon Beane, Sean McDermott came from Carolina. There's Coach Joe Brady was the offensive coordinator for Carolina, and then Dan Morgan, the GM for the Panthers, followed Brandon Beane to Buffalo, came back to Carolina. There's a lot of crossover. And looking at that matchup, I almost like that Andy Dalton is in there more than Bryce Young in terms of if you're hoping for a shootout, because I think some of these, Andy Dalton kind of falls in the Ryan Fitzpatrick bucket of backup quarterbacks, where like the first game or two, I think they come out slinging it and just going with it. And then like it kind of cools off after, like, once you get to game 3, 4, or 5. But those first couple games, I think that some of these veteran quarterbacks can really come out of the chute hot. I think that's an interesting call out. And I agree with you there. Buffalo off of 2 straight losses, off of a bye week. I mean, there's a rumor today they're looking at wide receiver, and God, they better be looking at wide receiver because it's been brutal. But you'd think that they want to get some things right there. I think Jalen Hurts is really interesting at 6,600. I called out Saquon Barkley last week. I was wrong on Saquon Barkley last week. I'm kind of at the point now where I'm just I'm not going to call out Saquon Barkley anymore. And I think the Eagles have kind of reached that point too, because when you look at what they did last week and what Jalen Hurts put up last week, it was really reminiscent of 2022, 2023 Jalen Hurts in the way that 300 plus passing yards. It had been a long time since we had gotten there with him, and I think that that's in play. We're waiting and monitoring the health of AJ Brown. I mean, obviously we know shoving him into the end zone a couple times is definitely in play. I think Dak Prescott's interesting on your Cowboys, John, because I think people might avoid that matchup out of fear of the Denver defense. And I think there's a chance that this Dallas offense is just so good that it doesn't matter that the Denver defense is really good. And that can be a way to get into some really low ownership and potential. We are expecting it to be a shootout game, but a side that people might stray away from, I think could be really interesting play on that side there. Let's look at running backs here, and we've kind of touched on a handful. And so this is you're gonna have to talk me off the ledge here, because I write a long article on Monday. It's called The Roundup, and I do like stats of the week. And I get to a point sometimes in the season where guys are just putting up stats that are so interesting on their own. They basically get their own section. And I'm at the point now where Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, and Bijan Robinson, I call it the holy running back trinity right now with what they're doing statistically, because the things that they're doing are unheard of. Basically, Jonathan Taylor, you mentioned the 10 touchdowns. Jonathan Taylor has 5 career 3-touchdown games, and 3 of them are in his last 5 games. So that tells you what these guys are doing right now. Christian McCaffrey is, I think it's 3 games short of the NFL record for most consecutive 50-yard receiving teams by a running back. And so like these are my thing to you is because I've started playing around with putting all 3 into one lineup and trying to figure out how I get to all 3 just being in one lineup in a GPP play. What's the level of insanity of going in that direction?
I mean, I get the sentiment, but I mean, I've already gone on record saying that Jonathan Taylor is just too efficient, and at some point that efficiency has to break. And you just named 3 guys who are extremely efficient in terms of their touchdown equity and their fantasy prowess. If you throw all 3 of them into a lineup, the likelihood that one of them falters and has just an average week, and you've just spent half of your entire salary on it, I think you die with that. So insane? No, I mean insane is putting nothing but Tennessee Titans into your lineup. That's insane. But maybe I don't know what the word would be.
Foolhardy?
Yeah. Maybe I'll live with foolhardy.
Phil, you might be muted. The dog
All right,
barking. I think Phil's dog's barking. John, what are you looking at for your GPP plays at running back?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, this is a position I really don't like this week. There's a lot of ownership clustered on 6 or 7 players, and it's all kind of at the same level. Um, I I I do. I'm going to go back to Derrick Henry. He's a cash game play. I think that his implied ownership or his early projected ownership is too low for the likelihood of him achieving value. The one that we didn't talk about in cash games that kind of stands out to me, excuse me, is Alvin Kamara. Kendre Miller is out for the season. He's definitely out this weekend. Yeah. And Alvin Kamara should be a guy who reaps the benefits there. They've got a 5th round pick that will come in, and maybe Taysom Hill will get some more time. But at the end of the day, I think Kamara benefits quite a bit there. And when I started looking at some of the popularity contest at this position versus the implied odds, this is the whole sims. I'm old school. I don't use a sim. I use my model, but effectively it's the same thing. And my sims are saying, if you will, if you allow me to use that, that Alvin Kamara is a good pick this week at the running back position for tournament play. And you just heard both Phil and I say that we liked his quarterbacks. So I think there's a world where you could start doing some double stacks. and basically get the ground game and the passing game if you pick the appropriate receiver there.
Phil, are you good to go, or you got some plays here?
Yeah, I'm good. Did you guys hear that, by the way, when he barked?
We did.
Oh yeah, he
You
was
did.
into
Okay.
Christian McCaffrey, as it were. So just
Yeah.
mark that down. If Christian McCaffrey blows up this weekend, we got to bring him in and see when he barks next week.
Okay. I thought I had noise cancellation on, but I failed at that once again. The dog strikes. Yeah. So agree with John, except for again, I know I pushed back on Kamara last week, and I'm just going to do it again. I just don't like the way the Saints running game and the way that his usage in the passing game is shaping up. I wish that they were doing a little bit more with like getting him in space rather than just dumping it off to him like on checkdowns. It's just been like a really boring way to use Alvin Kamara, frankly, and it hasn't really worked out yet for fantasy. So um, I don't mind the idea that no one else is going to be behind it, and he is Alvin Kamara, and these things do happen once or twice a year. But that's about all I see with him. Um, I liked Devon Achan at 7,300. He's kind of priced in no man's land because everyone either can't afford him because he's too expensive, or they're looking past him so that they could get to one of the holy trinity there. And the last time that this was the case was 2 weeks ago, and I didn't pull the trigger on it in tournaments because he wasn't projecting all that well, and he ended up scoring 34 points that week. He's again not projecting well, so this isn't the type of thing where I'm looking at numbers and I'm seeing something popping out about Devon Achan. But I do think that the Falcons defense has turned into something of a run funnel quietly. If you look at their rushing yards per play allowed, it's the sixth highest in the league. And if you look at their passing yards per play allowed, it's the second lowest in the league. We did see that Christian McCaffrey got to them for 2 scores last week. Before that, they had only allowed one rushing touchdown all season. So when we look at traditional fantasy points allowed, they weren't ranking that high, but I think it's because they were just on the better side of touchdown variance until they ran into CMC. So Devon Achan, similar back to McCaffrey. I don't think anyone wants to touch the Dolphins this week. I like that entire game environment. I think it's one that is going to go over the total that Vegas set of 44 and a half. So that's a game that I'll be stacking, and I'll be doing the Dolphins side with mostly Achan. Brees Hall, we talked about. We couldn't quite get there in cash, I don't think. So I'll throw him into the GPP section just because of the strength of the matchup. I'm hopeful that Tyrod Taylor is the Jets quarterback this week because he could complete forward passes that will help keep the offense on track. Hopefully get them some first downs, sustain some drives, and put Hall in a position where he could do something besides run into the back of the line. But it's the same case that I was making for him last week. He takes all the carries. He's highly skilled, and he's in a great matchup. It's just that he's a Jet. And lastly, on the other side of that game, Chase Brown at 5,400, I think is interesting. Not a fan of his recent workload splits because he's been losing more to Samaj Pirine, but if the Bengals can hold a lead on these Jets, which is the implication, right? They're heavy favorites, then we should see less of Pirine on the field. I thought Brown looked really good last week against Pittsburgh. Some of that was Pittsburgh's defense. He ran for 108 yards on 11 carries, but some of those were just playing good runs, which was nice to see. And obviously, Flacco has his presence has opened up some breathing room for the entire offense, including the running game. Script is in his favor, point totals in his favor. I'm into Chase Brown as a low owned differentiator, and 5,400 he's at a unique price point as well.
I think he's just to add on to that. He was a guy I was gonna when you were done. I was gonna say, what do we think of him? Because I think he's really sneaky this week. He's only 5% owned. Last week, big week. Before that, he played Green Bay. Before that, he played Detroit, Denver. These are some pretty decent defenses. Maybe not Detroit so much, but certainly 2 out of the previous 3 weeks that he had played against some tough defenses and negative game scripts, as you already pointed out. I think he might be one of the sneakier plays this week, especially if Jamar Chase gets juiced up heading into the weekend. It's a good leverage play.
Yeah, the Lions defense has been noted to be strong against running backs against the run game, and they just blew the Bengals out in that game. So there wasn't even an opportunity for Brown to get anything rolling there. I love a good narrative. Javonte Williams going up against his former team, the Denver Broncos, in that same game we mentioned with Dak Prescott. I think that's interesting. Could find the end zone a couple of times. DeAndre Swift has been excellent the last 2 weeks. Coming out of that bye, they've really emphasized the run game. If Baltimore's defense doesn't have things figured out, like I know they're still pretty banged up, that could be a place to go. DeAndre Swift. The other side of that, Javonte Williams, J.K. Dobbins, sitting here at 5,800 going up against the Dallas defense, I think is pretty interesting. We've seen Dobbins take the lead in the run game that hasn't been there in the past game. He hasn't scored for a couple of weeks. That's lowered his point total, but going against Dallas, anybody can score, it seems like, at some point. I think Rico Dowdle is really interesting. We saw last week Chase Hubbard or Chuba Hubbard come back and split that backfield, but Dowdle prior to that was the hottest running back in the league. Maybe the Panthers decide to lean back into that, plug that back in. Buffalo's run defense has been horrid. I'm half surprised that Bijan Robinson didn't go for 250 yards in that game on Monday night. And then mentioning Bijan Robinson, if you wanted some direct leverage, Tyler Algier at 4,800. I don't really know that I love a straight up backup running back, but Tyler Algier in games that the Falcons have the lead, he's basically running back 2, almost, he's very usable in those types of situations at 4,800. Very, very cheap, gives you direct leverage on Bijan Robinson in a tournament setting. So maybe that's somewhere to explore, just to be, if you want to be ultra contrarian. Wide receivers, let's run through wide receivers. What do we have on our board that we haven't touched yet at wide receivers? Phil, what are you going to look at here?
Yeah, so I think that the Texans receivers, in the absence of Nico Collins and I believe the absence of Christian Kirk again, are kind of the mystery box on this slate, and maybe getting one of them right is a path towards winning a tournament. I like Jaden Higgins at 3,500. I know that Jalen Noel got the counting stats and the targets last week, but he was still sharing the slot with Braxton Berrios of all players. I don't know what the Texans are thinking there. It was Higgins who was on the field for 65% of the snaps, and he does profile more of as a direct replacement for Nico Collins, the type of receiver that he is. And he's a guy I really liked in the preseason. So I'm probably biased and just kind of praying for my best ball bags, but he's my pick of the Texans guys. Then I like Stephon Diggs at 5,800. I want to make one bet on Drake May every week, just because he has proven worthy of that. And I think that Diggs, as his number one receiver, he's been super efficient on his routes. At some point, I think we're going to see that playing time ramp up fully. And, now we're nearing the midway point of the season. I'd love to see what it looks like with Diggs on a full allotment of snaps. And I want to be ahead of it before it happens, because after that, he's going to be more expensive. He's going to be higher owned. So I like Diggs, even though, and that's a total one-off. I really don't like anything else in that game. And then the last name on my list, you might need to tell me how to say this guy's name, Jeff. I think you're a fan of him. Is it Shimray DK?
Chimere DK?
Yes. 3,400, right? He saw his role increase heavily in the first game without Calvin Ridley. Tyler Lockett was granted his release from the team. That should open up a few more slot snaps, which is where DK saw most of his time. You could tell the folks a little bit more about him, Jeff, from your time prospecting. I know that you're a fan of his game. But from what I could tell, he's a slot guy who could also run downfield routes out of the slot. We saw him break one for a touchdown last week. This Indy defense has allowed more fantasy points to wide receivers than any other team. They're going to be up big. Cam Ward is going to have to throw at least 40 times in this game if I had to bet. In the slot, particularly, is where they struggle. They allow 5 fantasy points over expected to enemy slot wide receivers. So DK has the positional advantage there, too. I think he's probably the receiver to bet on if you're going to make a bet on that ugly Titans offense. So what do you think about DK?
Yeah, he's a very explosive athlete. He is a returner, but also I think that would undersell him. He is ability to win deep, but also, like you mentioned, slot receiver. He was really 2 years ago, he was Wisconsin's entire passing game, and Wisconsin is not a good football team, but he was their entire passing game. And then he went to Florida the next year, had 1 year with Florida, really emerged there, tested great at the combine. They actually took him above Alec Aomanor, everybody's favorite Titans rookie receiver. So I think when you're looking at it as a potential slot to get some volume in a loss, but also the explosive type of athlete that can make your day in just one play, he kind of offers a little bit of both of those sides.
Sweet, sweet confirmation bias. Thank you, Jeff.
John, what do you have?
I'm going to go quickly. I can see we're up against time. We're having a good time here, and time flies. Looking at my list, Marvin Mims is a guy at 3,900, big play receiver, going against my Cowboys in a potential shootout, low ownership. I think he's a very good GPP play this week. Rashid Shaheed, I think we talked about already. DJ Moore, I like against Baltimore. Folks are going to be on Rome Odunze there if they're trying to get exposure to that defense, the Ravens defense that we've already talked about on the show. And I think DJ Moore is a good leverage point against Odunze. And then, I mean, maybe I'm crazy for keep coming back to the Jets, but Josh Reynolds is another cheap option that, I mean, somebody's got to catch the ball there, and nobody's really going to be thinking about the Jets offense this week. And, you know, it's one of those situations where if you're going to stack the Bengals, let's say you do a Flacco, Chase Brown, Jamar, your run back option could be somebody like Josh Reynolds, and nobody's going to have him.
That was scary. I dropped out and I trust that you guys had it covered. I heard you talking about the Jets. Arian Smith might be a deep name, interesting name if Garrett Wilson's out. That's just he hasn't done anything at all. But he's playing nearly every snap, and so he is an ultra fast guy, type of guy that can make your day in just one play. Tez Johnson, 4,300. I don't know if you guys touched on him or not. I think he's going to be probably a pretty trendy option that might not match up to the trend based upon actual production, but that's an interesting play. Alec Pierce, 4,600. I think Alec Pierce is a really good receiver, and we know that he's capable of having some big days. Flirted with a 100-yard game last week. I think the popularity would be with Michael Pittman and with Josh Downs, but a player that in what should be a blowout can get deep for a couple of touchdowns. I think Alec Pierce is that type of player. Khalil Shakir at 5,100. The Bills trying to get right. That's an interesting way to go. Then I talked about Troy Franklin probably too much in the cash section, but Cortland Sutton at 6,200. Again, it's just that Dallas-Denver matchup. I am like, it's just a beat of honey for me, like trying to look at that one. I think it's an interesting way to go. Let's look at tight ends just kind of really quickly. Are there anything on the board for tight ends that we haven't touched yet?
I've got 2 that I like. First one might take a little bit of narrative to roll with because he hasn't done anything all season, but John mentioned punting for the minimum. Isaiah Likely is right there at 2,600. And he had foot surgery before the season, got back pretty early. He's been predictably ineffective. I always kind of had following the Ravens bye circled as when we could expect him to look a little bit more like himself. And in their last game before the bye, he was on the field for 81% of the snaps. That was more than Mark Andrews. He ran 32 routes. That was more than Mark Andrews. So if he's feeling a little bit more like himself, we know that he's one of the more athletic tight ends in the league. We like the Ravens offense against the Bears. I think that's an interesting punt. And then Noah Fant, 3,200. So, just going back through the decades that Joe Flacco has been a quarterback, Dennis Pitta, Owen Daniels, Mark Andrews, David Njoku. He's kind of the tight end kingmaker, right? And it shouldn't have shocked anyone that Fant scored 14 DraftKings points last week in his first game with Mike Gesicki out because he had Flacco as his quarterback. I think he can keep it up. The Jets have allowed 6 tight end touchdowns in 7 games this season to help Fant's case, and he's only 3,200.
Any other tight ends, John?
No, I think I've covered everybody that's on my list. Kincaid and Ruckerts if Mason's not playing, and I don't think it's anybody's going to be blown away if I recommend Tyler Warren. So I do, but I don't think it's really worth talking about why.
Again, National Tight Ends Day. George Kittle. George Kittle is actually not the founder of National Tight Ends Day, by the way. So Garrett Selleck scored a touchdown, and Jimmy Garoppolo said, "What is this, National Tight Ends Day?" And that is when and George Kittle said, "Yes, it absolutely is. It was week 2 in 2018, and so that is where National Tight Ends Day is born. It was recognized as a national holiday by the NFL in 2019, and so it is a great day to celebrate all tight ends. I mean, George Kittle looked bad last week. He's probably not worth playing in the lineup, but at the same time, it's his day, and you kind of wonder if George Kittle isn't going to be able to go. Let's do our favorite stacks of the week. Phil, what's your favorite stack of the week?
Give me Daniel Jones, Michael Pittman, run back with Shimmery DK.
John, what do you have?
Give me, Josh Allen, Keon Coleman, double stack with Dalton, and run back with McMillan on the other side.
All right, I am going to I'll take the low-hanging fruit. I'll go with Denver here. I'm going to go with Bo Nix. I'm going to go with Cortland Sutton. If you want to get spicy, you can throw Troy Franklin in there maybe, but I think those two, and then I just love the narrative. I love Javonte Williams coming back the other way against the Denver Broncos and finding the end zone a couple of times. Discount play of the week. John, what's your favorite discount play?
I probably talked about him. I'm going to go with Ruckert because I really didn't prepare for this.
No worries at all. I think this is relatively new from your time. So, Phil, what do you have for the discount play?
All right, it's going to be an all Jets discount play segment because it's actually going to depend too on if Justin Fields or if Tyrod Taylor starts. If it's Fields, give me Josh Reynolds, who John already mentioned. If it is Taylor, give me his guy Tyler Johnson, who he had a strong connection with in the preseason. I think we see that a lot when the backup comes in. They have a favorite, and in Taylor's case, it's Johnson.
Yeah, I'm going to go Colson Loveland at 3,000, assuming Cole Kmet's out of the lineup. And if Cole Kmet's not out of the lineup, give me Jalen Noel at 3,500, assuming Nico Collins is out of the lineup. But I think those two are going to be my interesting discount plays for the week. That's all we've got. And John, I want to toss it to you. I want you to lead us out here in the show. So give some advice or just any thoughts that might be percolating before we head out.
Yeah, maybe I'll just close where we opened and urge folks to look in that middle tier. We've got I'm looking, there are 2 teams above 4 touchdowns, Indianapolis, Baltimore. There's going to be a lot of action on those. Denver certainly just below that, but then you've got Baltimore, Tampa Bay, Atlanta, Cincinnati, Philadelphia. When you start thinking about your tournament lineups, think about those teams because they're going to be glossed over in some cases. And I know, Jeff, you talked about the Eagles being overlooked, and certainly we know they're capable of 30 points on any given week. So, always be thinking about zagging when folks are zigging in tournament play. So best of luck to everybody, and I'm glad to be here for the second week in a row.